A lot of news, guys. Israel, the speaker's race, whole bunch of stuff. Sonny, Hogan, you guys been paying attention to all this, I'm sure.
I've been
Oh, of
watching the
course.
news 24/7. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Both situations, what we're seeing overseas is just horrific in so many ways. What we're seeing with the speaker's race, obviously problematic for Republicans moving forward. So there's just so much going on with long-term ramifications. But I could not be more excited about our guest today, Tim.
Yes, it's good.
She's one of my favorite people on the entire planet.
Well, let's not delay it then. We'll get right to it because this is the Line Drive podcast. Introducing the one and only Mollie Hemingway, editor-in-chief of thefederalist.com, one of the great conservative publications. I think the finest, most thoughtful conservative publication that we have available to us on the internet today, and also the author of the groundbreaking book Rigged. And I just learned one of Hogan Gidley's favorite people, and certainly mine as well. Mollie Hemingway, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here with you.
And Tim, she's so smart when you see her across all the platforms, when you read her stuff, when you see her on TV, so smart, but she's very funny. It doesn't come across all the time on TV, but off camera, behind the scenes, when you talk to her, she's so smart, but so funny. That's kind of an unknown about Mollie, I feel.
Not true, but I love it.
Well, I think it sort of is. You're also you're a great read all the time in the Federalist, and you know I've worked with you on some stories in the past, and you're also a great follow on Twitter. I got to say,
Yes.
very think you don't pull any punches, not afraid to think, you know. Go ahead and react to that.
My husband makes fun of me because I'll be like, "Did you see I had a good tweet today?" And he's like, "That's not really a thing, you know, like that's not really something we're aiming for in our lives." But
he says husband. What? He says that we're not aiming for that?
Just like it's so silly, you know, but
wow. I'm afraid to say
I have satisfying.
Yeah,
so satisfying.
I have the same conversations in my house, honestly.
Me too.
You know,
it must be a thing.
Your newborn son is not too impressed with your Twitter flexes.
He's telling me to get my engagement up all the time. I'm trying.
So let's talk about something that obviously there's a ton of news as we just touched on as we got started here. But the biggest one that is worldwide, of course, is what's happening in the Middle East. The brutal, really unprecedented and surprise attack by Hamas on Israel. And I think the death toll from that is still unknown how high that's going to get. But in the last 24 hours, we've seen, I think, one of the more embarrassing escapades in recent media history with this news of supposedly a hospital was attacked yesterday and then into overnight. Turns out it was a wayward rocket, a failed rocket launch from not even Hamas, but by the Islamic Jihad, the sort of their neighboring terrorist group that exploded in a parking lot. And was not an attack on a hospital. So, Mollie, there are so many different storylines that unfold when something's like, what is it that you're paying attention to? What are you watching?
It's just an overwhelming story. I've been watching a lot ever since the attack happened. It's actually one of the things I'm glad that we have some media that's not completely filtered so that we could learn what was going on from the moment the attack started. So you had that Saturday attack where Hamas is actually live streaming what they're doing and you can just see it and it's horrific. And then you have you'd seen what had happened, but then you have all of a sudden like the media saying, well, we're not really sure if they actually killed these children this way. You know, yeah, they killed all these children, but we don't know the precise way they did it. Unless we have video of them doing it live, we're not going to accept the idea that, you know, for instance, they were beheaded, maybe they were just burned to a crisp or something like that. But then when you have this wayward rocket that strikes a parking lot near a hospital, they just run completely with the Hamas spin that it was hundreds of people killed, that the hospital was destroyed, and that Israel did the strike. And it looks like none of those things were true. I mean, it does seem that there were casualties from this wayward missile fired on it, you know, by these people on themselves, because there were some like refugee type people who were hanging out near the parking lot And I don't know if it was like 30 or 60 people died that way. But it's true. In war, it's a fog. You don't know what's being said. You don't know, you should check everything out on all sides. But the whiplash from refusing to believe these horrible things that we all saw into credulously accepting whatever Hamas, a terrorist organization with a history of lying about casualties and responsibility for bombings and stuff, it was just insane to watch.
There's a couple of layers there where Hamas should not be believed because one, they're known to put militants and put their military assets inside hospitals or under hospitals or next to hospitals and daycare centers and schools and all that stuff. And so if a hospital is blown up, which is certainly conceivable, it's probably because if it happened, it's probably because there's military assets there. But then if it didn't actually happen the way they said it did, how in the world did they come up with these nice round numbers, 500 casualties within like 30 minutes?
Immediately.
There's no chance they would know who got killed in 30 minutes.
And every media person seemed to just regurgitate it and accept it like right away. And then I even saw President Biden saying something in Israel, which I would not advise him to have gone to Israel. Like, I'm not even saying this politically, but just as an American, we need him to stay home, get rest, and not go out on a world stage where like everybody can see him struggling like he struggled there. But he says, I think the other team did the strike at the hospital, which is such an unserious way to talk about a terrorist group. The other team, he's like, but there are a lot of people who think it was Israel. It's like, what? It's not. There are a lot of people who think aliens exist. That doesn't mean you say that. Like, say what's true. Say what you know.
Didn't Obama also call ISIS like the JV team as well? So like, there's this weird theme going on there where it's like they don't really think that people who commit acts of terrorism, they're just teams. And at the end of the day, teams play on Saturday and football and Sunday. And at the end, you just shake hands and say, hey, we all fought hard. It's a good, well-fought game. It's not a game. This is serious stuff. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why so many on the left and so many in the media rush to defend and parrot a terrorist organization, as Tim pointed out, that is known to lie consistently. And we always argue on this show all the time, or I get really worked up about the media and their just ridiculous behavior in so many ways.
And I spend a lot of time defending the media.
Yeah.
You must,
Sure.
Tim.
That's true. But I can't figure out, like, so often, whenever they make mistakes, it's always like against us, right? Like whenever the algorithm messes up on Twitter, Facebook, somehow it always messes up against Republicans. Whenever the media makes mistakes, it always seems to hurt us. It's like in this fog of war, they're willing to go ahead and just forego all the fact checks, that they give to us and just parrot these liars, these terrorists. And I don't understand why they do it. At the very least, Molly, wouldn't you think they'd want to get these stories correct from a factual standpoint, or are they just more focused on the narrative itself?
So I was talking to my colleague, David Harsani, today, and he said, you look at all these things that are happening on college campuses, and these people who are doing these pro-Hamas protests, they're going to be leaders in the media and politics someday. And I'm like, well, I'm old enough that there were pro-Palestinian groups on campus when I was in college. And like, that is who's running things right now. Like we wonder why the Hamas propaganda is getting into the New York Times. It's because they work there. The people who support that. Like, it's just
great point.
It's not even just the media at this point. I mean, you have congressmen that are falling right in line with the same narrative that immediately took off with Tlaib. Everything that happened today with her crying, saying, we can cry for the kids, but yet she can't even answer, do you condemn the beheading of babies in Israel? That's not a question that you need to sit down and discuss with your comms director before you give an answer on it. So, I mean, how do these people even get in Congress, and what should happen to them, Molly? What do you think?
Well, I mean, Rashida Tlaib was elected by her, she's overwhelmingly popular. Isn't she out of Dearborn? I was
Yeah.
getting a kick out of these, like people saying we need to, that this is what decolonization means, is what Hamas did to these children and young women in southern Israel. That's what decolonization means. Did you think it was, vibes and good feelings? And I'm like, what do you call what's happening with like Rashida Tlaib's constituents in Dearborn? I'm sure a lot of the people who didn't immigrate recently, who immigrated longer ago or whatever, they might view this as a bit of a colonization and they might be wishing for a decolonization. They never think through how that might be perceived by people outside of the context that they want it.
Yeah, and it's really created a lot of very tortured and incongruous pairings. Like Tlaib, I think, is the one where outside of her office in the House office building, she has a Palestinian flag, which is representing a country, of course, that does not exist. A Palestinian flag next to a pride flag.
Yeah.
And what do you think that the nice folks at Hamas would do if you walked over there, fresh out of a queer pride parade or something? What, how does that mix?
I do think that there are these groups on the left that do make common cause, and that we should be more aware of it going into it. Like, you see all these people saying, "Oh, we're not going to fund these colleges because you aren't speaking out against anti-Semitism enough," or "We're not going to hire these people at our law firm because they were defending Hamas." It's like, well, BLM never hid the fact that they were pro-Hamas. Like, they were pretty open about it. They're on videotape saying it. And our corporations gave them $80 billion. You had Republican senators marching with them, Mitt Romney, and other people on the, supposedly on the right, praising them. They never hid that they were this radical Marxist organization that sought the destruction of the family and supported radical terrorist regimes. And we were like, hey, let's help them out. And if you said something like, I don't think that's so good, people lost their minds over you.
Yeah, and that, that's what these corporations, they're rushing to avoid being, targeted and dragged out into the public square. And so the desire to appease the woke crowd is greater than looking at what that association actually means. They would rather stay out of the crosshairs of BLM, and they can swallow the Hamas stuff if it means staying out of the BLM crosshairs. That's what it means to me.
I think, Tim, one of the byproducts, though, like of COVID, for example, was that parents actually got to take a look behind the curtain and see what their kids were being taught. And so now you're seeing an influx of concerned parents, not just worried about curriculum and getting involved, but running for school board elections, things like that. I do think an interesting byproduct here is something that Mollie had just talked about and touched on, and that is, for a long time, we were like, what are these kids learning in school, like in college? Is it worth it to go to college? Like, what are they actually teaching? What are the majors what are the subjects they're studying? These types of things. It's almost a very interesting, eye-opening byproduct of this war, where people are like, oh, wait a minute. That's what they've been learning this whole time. They have been taught something that isn't true. We're paying for this. So I think there's an interesting little, I said byproduct, but result of these catastrophes, where you're like, wait a minute, a lot more people are waking up to the fact that of course grade schools are bad with the COVID stuff, but colleges and universities, they're no better.
Are they waking up though? I mean, you have colleges and universities that are publicly funded throughout this country. How many legislatures and governors are saying, hey, because you don't educate anymore, we're going to actually do something to you? I mean, I don't really get the feeling that a lot of people on the right use whatever power they have to get wins. And it's causing some major political problems for the Republican Party, because people are kind of sick of not getting wins. You talk to people all the time. They're like, why does it seem like we can't win on anything? And you look at what the left has accomplished, and they're so radical. Like, even in the Democrat caucus in the House, they're so radical. But they keep on getting these serious wins in academia, in media, in corporations. Like, the wins on the right are a little harder to find.
That is honestly such a good point. And it makes me think about the election coming up next year. and how all of this is going to have an influence on it. Are Americans going to remember how weak Biden has been throughout this whole process? I mean, watching him today, I think he was on Air Force One when he had Karine Jean-Pierre with him. He had John Kirby, everyone right there. And I don't know if y'all saw this or looked at their faces, but every single one of them looked like they were on pins and needles, hoping this man did not say something that they were going to have to spin later on. But Molly, how do you think this plays into the election?
So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, there are two things I think about. One is media, because I always think about the media, which is why
Yeah.
Hogan and I are constantly talking about how we feel about corporate media. But one is like, you had for 4 years people being absolutely hysterical and claiming that the world was coming to an end because of Trump administration policies. So like every day there would be a press conference and they would be screaming at whoever was up there, whether it was Trump or one of his people, and they'd be acting like it was an intolerable insanity. And they just like the fever pitch was really high. And now we have like, just like, it's horrible. It's war everywhere. It's weakness abroad everywhere. It's no border. It's crime, inflation, a bad economy. And they're like, sir, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. And then he'll like mumble a response and there's like spinal fluid dripping out of his mouth. And people are like, oh, thank you. That was so good. I really, really love what you said, you know? And it's like, it's just, you feel like you're taking crazy pills every day. So like, what does it matter? I don't know, because the corporate media still have a lot of control. And actually, I was talking to my parents today and they were like livid at how poorly Biden performed today. And I just responded, 81 million votes. You know, that's the man who got 81 million votes. And my point with that is, if you run ballots like Democrats run ballot operations, I don't even know if it matters. You can elect a John Fetterman. You can elect a Katie Hobbs or a Joe Biden. Like, it doesn't matter how much they are awful. They just get the ballots into the box.
Yeah, it's not even, it's not an election these days, a national election in particular. It's not even a contest of who can convince the most voters. It's who can round up the most ballots. Right. And they are going to do that. The Democrats are going to do that. Unfortunately, our side, I think, is a lot of times reluctant to, certainly they don't want to break the law, but they're reluctant to even use the laws where such things are permissible in certain states. Like ballot harvesting is legal in some states, but our guys don't want to do it because they find it distasteful. They think it's unethical, which it is. I agree.
It's totally distasteful and not how you should vote. You should vote.
Right.
You should convince people to vote and have them come on election day and we all do it together. But that's not the system we're in. So you kind of have to just like accept that that's not the system.
You play by the rules of the game. And I say this all the time, but it'd be like if I said in a football game, you can score points by running it, passing it, and kicking it. And it's like Republicans say, yeah, but I think running it and passing it are very immoral and distasteful. So we're just going to kick the ball. Fine, but you're going to get your ass handed to you every time you step on the football field. The same thing applies here. And Tim, it's like 37 states allow ballot harvesting. If that's the case,
right?
We got to get in there and do it better. And I guarantee you, if we do it better, they'll want to change the policy. Remember Facebook in Obama's second term, and they're like, it's brilliant the way he used Facebook. And then like Cambridge Analytica comes along and does way better on Facebook.
You're like, who allowed this to happen?
Like, hey, we should really censor Facebook. Like if we get out there and ballot harvest better, they're going to be like, hey, you know what we should do? Get rid of ballot harvesting. I guarantee you, if we beat them at their own game, they'll want to change the rules.
Yeah, and when look, the media has its moments where they talk about the Joe Biden has no clothes, so to speak, and I don't know if they're aware of his spinal fluid problem, which you just revealed, Molly, which sounds pretty serious.
He doesn't wear clothes in front of Secret Service agents.
Yeah, that's true. We have heard those stories, but they will, the media will snap back into shape, and they're already starting to do it. I got into a little bit of a Twitter spat with what you were talking about right when you joined us, Molly, because Axios, I replied to an Axios story. Axios had a story up just this week where how conservatives love to talk about how the southern border is wide open, but in fact, that's not true. And they go through all of, did you see that story?
Yes, it was like straight propaganda. And it's like embarrassing that the Biden administration is like, Axios will run our propaganda. It's just not great. But like, had that guy ever been to a border? Had he ever, like any border, much less our border? He knew nothing about what it means for someone to be, arrested or captured and what
Process.
that he just like didn't understand the process at all.
Right. And so that's what's going on. I mean, there will be, and it's already, and they you know that they're always going to snap back into this, but there will be, Hogan and I lived through this, he in the administration and then the campaign, and I was 2 years on the Trump campaign in 2020. Those folks, by and large, 89-90% of them, they all wear the jersey. And when it comes crunch time, which means election year, they will get off the sidelines and they will be in there and they will be on Team Biden or
So
Team
Tim,
Democrat, whoever their nominee happens to be.
you have noted accurately that they will occasionally not be so harsh on, or that they will be a little harsh on Biden. I'm wondering what you think their game is. Like, it's so rare to see them be even minorly critical of a Democrat, much less like a Democrat president. Do you think they're trying to get him out of the race so they can get someone easier to carry water for? Or what do you think? What's their angle?
Yeah, I don't, I think there have been a couple of times where I was tempted to think that maybe they've made a decision. And I think they don't have like a morning editorial meeting where all the different news outlets get together and talk about it.
That's called Twitter.
Yeah, right. But there is definitely a hive mindset that takes over and everyone knows what everyone else is thinking. And I thought there were some signs that they had decided that it was time for Joe Biden to exit the stage because a bunch of stories came out in a little flurry. But then I see them propping it up. Like I see the Twitter accounts of his performance while he's in Israel, and it just does not match with reality. They're giving him so much more credit for performance than he deserves. And so I think they've understood. I think they understand now that he's their guy. If he's still alive come election time in 2024, he's going to be their candidate. I believe that they think that. If the DNC, they're going to always a national political party is always going to defer to the incumbent president of the United States, right? If Biden decides he wants to be on the ballot, he's going to be on the ballot. That's the way I see it. I don't know. How do you see it, Molly? What do you think?
I don't know. It's been very confusing. When David Ignatius came out and said, you got to get off the ballot, I was like, oh, it's serious, because David Ignatius doesn't write anything the CIA doesn't want him to write. So I was like, I guess time's up for Biden, but then it didn't seem to, or maybe it was just like trying to send a strong signal that other people should get in there.
And there are some.
I'm being a little extreme there, but the guy run. Yeah, sorry.
There are some smokes. Go ahead, Hogan. I'm sorry.
Some little cracks in the dam there, but I mean, look, Hunter Biden has a problem leaving things strewn all over the country, whether it be drugs, guns, cars, illegitimate children, whatever. But it took a story from Maureen Dowd to make it okay to say, hey, maybe you should pay attention to this other grandchild, right? Ignatius says, hey, he should be off the ballot. And then you get a few of them chattering. But as we were kind of talking through this, it's like once you get one of the establishment elite members of the media to say it's okay to tell Joe Biden he should recognize a grandchild, then everyone goes, okay, fine. It's like they get the marching orders from the one person or from one entity, but it doesn't stay around. It's just like they'll acknowledge it, and then they'll say, wow, didn't he do a good job? Now that we say it's okay for him to acknowledge it, now acknowledge it. Wow, what a wonderful, loving grandfather. You know what I mean?
They rewrote some of their stories. Like they had those People magazine spreads where they would be like, Joe Biden and Jill Biden are the best grandparents in the history of the world, and they have 6 grandchildren.
That's
and everyone's like, actually, they have 7 that we know of. And so then when Joe Biden finally was like, okay, so it turns out I'm going to stop being a monster in just this one little way. I'm not going to meet her. I'm not going to hug her. I'm not going to love her. I'm not going to give her gifts, but I will admit that she is the daughter of my son.
Can't use my name and make millions like everybody else.
But then they all went back in and quietly edited their stories. And they were like, he has 7 grandchildren. It was like, we always had 7. And they didn't even acknowledge that they were changing it or why. We don't use the metric of you have as many grandchildren as you say. There's an objective reality beyond what you say, right?
Yeah. It's like Back to the Future or something, where if a character in a movie goes back in time and changes something in the timeline, you can see headlines in the future changing as the reality. It's what they've done. They've gone back and they've rewritten history without any trace of it. It's pretty remarkable.
If the media decides at this point in time or in the future that Joe Biden is no longer their guy, who's it going to be? Who's going to be their Their pick.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Molly?
I mean, I think
I don't know.
I put
Gavin Newsom thinks he's first in line.
yeah.
That was going to be my guess. Is it Kamala though?
No, Gretchen Whitmer would be my other
Yeah.
person I would put in there.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
would.
she
First of all, have you ever
wants it.
seen Gretchen Whitmer and Caitlyn Jenner in the same room? Okay,
Oh boy, that's
listen,
a good one. Woo!
Just
Hot take.
Just real quickly. Sonny, you were just talking about who's going to be.
Yeah.
If they have, I would love to see the Gavin Newsom, like half the party running to Gavin Newsom, but by their own standard, those people would be sexist and racist and bigoted. So it would be like an interesting dynamic, and I'm so cheering for it because I would love to see that fight, just to watch them try and refuse Kamala, even though she's the vice president, and then embrace Gavin. It would be, I just think it would be delicious to watch.
What if they try to switch up the VP? Nobody thinks they get along, and maybe that would give them the juice they need at the end. I don't know.
I don't know who in the leadership of the Democratic Party is going to be willing to bounce a black woman off the ticket.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think they can do that politically within their own party. I don't think.
Speaking of our own party, can we pivot to our little kerfuffle? Is it time?
That's a good way
Go
to
ahead.
describe
Yeah, sure.
it.
Go ahead. You mean with the speaker? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go
We
ahead.
got a lot of kerfuffles. I'm just saying this is a big one.
Right. Which one are you talking about? Go ahead.
So, all right, Molly, we know kind of the jockeying for position here. It looks like Jim Jordan lost a vote from yesterday, so he's going in the wrong direction now. I will say, I know Scalise and McCarthy, I hear they don't like each other. I would have loved the juxtaposition of the left this entire election cycle. They're going to say, you're radical, violent extremists, and then have Scalise just walk up with a cane full of bullet holes and be like, let me tell you a little something about radical, violent extremists. But it's not going to happen because he's not running anymore. Give us kind of your assessment of what's going on, where this goes, how we get out of it.
I just want to first off say I was in New York the day that Steve Scalise announced that he had cancer. And I said to a group of media people, oh, that's such a shame. He's been through so much. And they said, what do you mean?
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, every day is like,
serious?
I am. And, I lived near the baseball field where the left-wing activists tried to assassinate the entire Republican baseball team. And even in my neighborhood at the time, it was not a big deal. And I just kept on being like, this is so weird. And you might remember the FBI tried to say it was not political terrorism until they were shamed into it. Okay. I don't know. I actually kind of thought Kevin McCarthy was doing a good job. Sorry, I'm going way back here. And what I mean by that is I don't think he's really much of an ideologue, and it's like an impossible job to be speaker. Sure. I think anyone who wants it should get it because it's so bad, particularly with a majority of 4. And I thought he kind of did pretty well, particularly for not being a conservative ideologue type person. I also understand he didn't get the budgets through, which was one of the promises. I do think that's important. We haven't had a regularly passed budget in 26 years or something like that. So I also understood some of the frustration from the people who did that.
Sure.
And then with Jordan, I always get nervous when an actual conservative is made speaker because the number one thing you have to do as speaker is compromise. And I would rather have a person who's not conservative compromising with conservatives than a conservative compromising with others. But having said that, I'm sure he would be great. And you said he was moving in the wrong direction, but that is one thing I do know is that the big strategy was, and I think by the Scalise team or people allied with him, was to have Jordan go way down on his second vote. So they were trying to pull people off, so that it would look like his momentum was going really poorly. But then he only went down 2, and they were hoping for more 30 or something like that. So it actually, inside the conference, I think it was viewed almost like he survived that attempt. And so that's another thing I learned from reporting for however many decades here in DC. What is happening internally is usually doesn't even seem important to outside eyes. and it's very hard to predict who's going to get it. So I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah.
Like I could see it being Jordan still, and I could also see them just not picking someone maybe and moving on to getting business done with this like weird guy who's the temporary person.
Hey, Trump said he has
From
the
North
best name-
Carolina.
Yeah, Trump says he has the best name in politics.
No.
What is it
Is that
again?
right? McHenry.
McHenry?
Patrick McHenry.
Why
It's
is he the
very-
best name? Because it's like Patrick Henry. Is that why?
I don't know if it just sounds very founding fathers ish. I
It
don't know.
does.
He used to say
Can
that
I-
all the
I
time.
mean, what do you guys say? I'm like, do you understand? Like, do you have theories on what's going to happen?
No, I think anybody who tells you that they know what's going to happen with this or in 2024, I think anybody
Right.
who tells you, oh, they're lying to you. No one actually knows. There's so many variables and so many. What we learned in 2020 is that when you think you know what the election is going to be about or what the outcome of a certain thing in politics is going to be, you clearly don't.
Or do you mean 2016?
Or 2016 as well. Yeah.
Because like I
But-
do think though, and I understand you all might have your own alliances or whatever like that, but just as an outside observer, I keep thinking about how throughout 2016 in the green rooms, it would all be like, okay, but who's really going to get the Republican nomination?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Trump was
sure.
actually
Yeah.
kind of ahead the whole time. People are like, yeah, but like, who's really going to get it? And he wasn't ahead by like as much as he's ahead now. It's like cartoonish figures of being ahead. So,
Mhm.
Tim, do you really think it's going to be like some surprise in Iowa? that
Oh,
changes
no.
the-
I don't mean on the Republican nomination. I think if Trump stays in the race, if unless something physically removes him from the playing field, he is the Republican nominee.
I'm not even sure if physical removal from the playing field, as in like going to prison, would
That's
change the
true.
dynamics.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if there's some health issue where he has to say, look, I'm not going
got
to
it,
run
yeah.
or something. If he is a candidate, either in jail or out of jail, he's the nominee. There's no question of that. I mean, the guy's got in a lot of polls, more than half of the polls I've seen, he's in the 60s, 62, 63% over the field. And you have either DeSantis or Haley coming in at about 15, 14, 13 or something. Is a massive lead. There's no way anybody can possibly catch him. All the stuff that's happening, this upcoming debate and the back and forth, DeSantis is running ads against Haley now. None of that matters. Not one word of any of that matters. Donald Trump is the nominee. And this was over a long time ago, really, I think. But I'm talking about the different twists and turns that a campaign can take.
Well, I do want to
Beyond-
say something about that though. Like if that's true, and I suspect that you're actually right, what would be the smart move for the Republican Party? Like I was thinking back to how you said if Biden wants to be the nominee, he will be the nominee. And in my mind, I was like, is Biden the one in charge? Is Biden the one in charge, or is it someone else? Like
True.
I always thought it was weird that Biden became the nominee. It seemed like it was highly orchestrated from
Oh sure.
forces that I
Yeah.
don't totally understand. But similarly with Trump, he's so far ahead. Biden's already treating him like he's his general election opponent because he probably is. Should the Republican Party be thinking a little bit more about its 2024 strategy as opposed to continuing with primary debate, or am I getting ahead of myself here?
Well, I mean, like, I don't think there's any mechanism by which you could remove all these other contestants from the race. All these primaries are still going to happen. These other candidates are qualified to be on the ballot. They're involved in the caucuses in Iowa, and so you can't. I don't think anything the party could do legitimately to stop any of that. It's just going to be a bloodbath, and Trump's going to win handily. That's the way I view it. But it's a process that has to be gone through. You know, I mean.
We're so look, by our nature, we're more individualistic, right? The left moves as a monolith. They want to put everyone in groups so they can push and pull the groups as it's politically expedient for them to do on any given day, whereas we're more individualistic. But I think the bigger point, Molly, that maybe you're trying to get at here is that if we know the inevitable's inevitable, when we know that, the sooner that the apparatus triggers its operation, the better off we'll be, because they won't be in line ready to go till like June or some crap like that. I mean, we'll be so far behind the eight ball at that point. Then,
And not just that, but it seems like this might be the kind of election where you've got a very close Senate, you've got a very close House, and it'll be a close presidential, possibly, or maybe it won't
Right.
in the weirdness that is our current moment. But it seems kind of like you'd want to run those together to some extent, like you remember how Glenn Youngkin ran with Jason Miyares and Winsome Sears in Virginia, and they kind of ran as a pack, and it was good for the other people too. So I don't know if that applies nationally, but you could see it being where you kind of want to have the same message together for the House, for the Senate, and with variations alongside of that. But
yeah, the different, I mean, the national map, state by state, each individual state could present different challenges. If you've got a statewide candidate in a state that is, let's say, a purple state, or maybe leans Biden or leans Democrat in a presidential, then the Senate candidate has to make a political calculation of how tight does he want to get with the Republican standard bearer at the top of the ticket. Those are things that just annoy the heck out of the presidential campaign, that, a statewide candidate in X state doesn't want to show up at the airport or something. That drives the presidential campaign nuts. But statewide candidates make calculations like that all the time. It depends on what their local politics are.
Sure.
It's a patchwork. It's a tough puzzle to put together. We're running over the time we told you we'd keep you on here, Molly. We really do appreciate your time, and it's, I think, very insightful. One thing I wanted to point out, as we were talking about the media and how they do a couple of stories that ding Biden here and there, but ultimately they'll get back to the fold. And why do they do that? It reminds me of, in the campaigns that I've worked on, when you're prepping your candidate and you've got a president in your own party that you're running with, like we were just talking about. We always prep them to prepare for the question of, from a reporter, where do you disagree with President Trump, for example, and have the candidates coached to know, oh, well, I disagreed with him on this bill and that bill and on this policy, just so the candidate can show that he or she has a little bit of an independent streak. Now, you might be 98% with the president on all the other issues, but you got to be able to point to some things where you disagreed. Just to show your independence to the voters when the media asks you. I think that's what the media is doing for themselves now. They point, hey, look, I criticized him about this one thing. That means I'm not totally in the bag. That's all it is.
Really good point.
So anyhow, Mollie Hemingway, we very much appreciate it. Author of the fantastic book Rigged and editor-in-chief of thefederalist.com. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.
And Sonny Joy Nelson, and for Hogan Gidley, I'm Tim Murtaugh. Thanks for listening. This has been the Line Drive Podcast.